Are you looking for a single test automation tool that will let you do API testing, performance testing, API mocking, and even web browser automation? Do you want that tool to let you write these tests using simple, human readable language? How about also running those tests in parallel for blazing fast test execution? If yes, then you've got to check out Karate. In this video, we're going to have a full overview of what the Karate test automation platform is and the features that make it so awesome. I'm then going to show you how easy it is to get the tool set up and configured. And we're going to dive straight into a demo where we'll write some automation tests using Karate against a real web application. If that sounds good to you, then breathe in, breathe out, and let's look into this together. So the Karate test automation framework is a real Swiss Army knife when it comes to automated testing. Karate was first developed back in 2017 by a chap named Peter Thomas. Peter started the project just on the side while he was working at Intuit. But fast forward to today in 2024 and it's since grown into a feature-rich framework. The reason for Peter creating Karate was to solve a number of problems that kept coming up in the world of software test automation, namely the perceived complexity of test automation, the need for coding skills to write automated tests, and the slow execution speed and total lack of reuse in automated testing. Let's expand on each of these problems, starting with the perceived complexity of test automation. Getting started with any kind of test automation is a daunting prospect. Whether you're doing API automation or performance testing or UI testing, you need to find a suitable framework or tool for each of these testing types, then go through a long learning curve, getting familiar with your chosen tool and understanding how it works. The next problem is that most test automation frameworks require you to use code to write tests, typically in a language like Java or JavaScript. But what if you're a product expert or a stakeholder who knows a lot about the system or application but doesn't have much coding knowledge? These guys are literally the best people to write automated test cases. They're the ones with deep knowledge of the system, yet they're held back needlessly because they might lack some technical skills. Finally, let's say you've written a bunch of API tests, but you now want to write some performance tests or UI tests. Well, sorry, you need to go through the whole process again of finding a tool or framework and learning how to use it for whatever new type of test you want to write. On top of that, the execution speed of the test you've written is slow, with each test running one after the other after the other. And this is where Karate comes in to address all of these challenges and much, much more. Let's walk through some of the features of Karate. Firstly, Karate tests are written using a simple human readable syntax. This syntax is actually based on another well-known syntax called Gherkin, which was popularized by test methodologies like behavior-driven testing and test-driven development. Because this simple syntax abstracts all the complexity of writing automated tests, it means that anyone can write tests, even if they aren't technical. You can also show these tests to non-technical folks, and they're easy to read and understand because they're human readable. With all that said, Karate does still allow you to write user-defined functions with code, so if you have specific use cases or complexities you need to address, you can really get the best of both worlds here. The next feature of Karate is its versatility. Once you've written a bunch of API automation tests using the Karate syntax, you can then convert those exact same tests into performance tests and even into browser automation tests. For performance tests, Karate integrates with Gatling, one of the leading open source performance testing tools that are available. And followers of this channel will know that I'm a huge fan of Gatling, and I've covered this tool in depth in multiple videos. I'll leave a link to one of my deep dive tutorials up here somewhere. For web browser automation, Karate integrates with all the major players in this space, including Selenium WebDriver, Microsoft Playwright, and the Chrome DevTools protocol. In fact, when it comes to integration, we're really only scratching the surface. If we take a look at the integrations page on the Karate website, we can see a ton of well-known tools and frameworks that Karate integrates with. As if that wasn't enough, there's even more Karate can do beyond API, UI and performance testing. It can also do mocking of API endpoints. You can use it to document your API. You can even use it to do regular desktop application UI automation. Okay, so this is starting to go way beyond the scope of this high-level overview video, but for more details on all the different functionality that Karate offers, do check out their documentation. Another key feature of Karate is its incredible execution speed. Speed of execution is one of the core principles of Karate, and this is achieved out of the box using threads. So rather than having to wait for each test to complete one by one, you can simply tell Karate how many threads you want your tests to run on, and these will execute in parallel. The only restriction you'll have is whether your hardware can handle the requested number of threads. Karate even has support for data-driven testing. So you'll define a scenario outline with a number of different parameters, for example, different usernames and passwords to log in with, or different products to purchase in an e-commerce store, and you'll then supply a data file, like a CSV file for example, with all the test data. Karate will then use that to execute a test for each data entry. Now, whenever you execute a Karate test, you'll get a detailed graphical test result report produced. This report gives you a clear breakdown of the automation tests that you executed, including the pass and fail metrics and specific details of any errors encountered. You can easily integrate these reports into your CI/CD pipeline or share them with other stakeholders or developers. The final core feature of Karate is that it's an open source project. Now, a core mission of the Karate project is their dedication to keeping the tool free to use and available to all. Being open source means that you'll be able to chat with a community of other Karate users who are also using the tool to write tests, and you'll be able to share tips and guidance with them. Now, of course, Karate Labs, the team who make Karate, are a for-profit organisation, and they need to make money somehow so that they can keep hiring developers and making the framework better and better. They do this by offering an enterprise subscription, which basically gives users access to priority support and premium new features. As well as this, Karate also offer different plugins for IDEs, namely IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code, and they charge a subscription fee for these. These plugins add a bunch of features to the IDE that make the experience of using Karate that bit better. For example, being able to execute tests and debug them directly in the IDE. But please do note that it is absolutely not required to have a subscription to one of these plugins in order to use Karate. If you want to learn more about the Karate Visual Studio and IntelliJ plugins, I'll leave a link to this page in the description and you can have a look for yourself. Alright, so we've gone over at a high level all the features of Karate, and now it's time to get hands-on and see it in action ourselves. You only need a few prerequisites installed to follow along here yourself. Chances are that you already have these installed. Firstly, it would be good if you have Git installed on the command line, just so that you can clone the template project I've created. But even if you don't have Git installed, you can just download the project without it. You will need to have the Java JDK installed, and it should be at least version 11. The OpenJDK also works fine here. And finally, although it's not strictly required, but it's good if you have an IDE like Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ installed. I'll be using Visual Studio Code for this demo just because it's the IDE I'm using a lot these days, but IntelliJ would work fine here too. Other IDEs like Eclipse would also be fine as well. And that's literally all we need. Okay, so let's take a look at the application that we're going to be writing tests against. So we're going to be using this video game DB application. This is just a simple API that I host online at this address, and I use this to teach some of my automation courses. So it's just a really simple API that just contains a bunch of fictional video games, basically. So it just contains all of the normal API calls that you can make: get, post, put, and delete. So let's just try a couple of these out. So I'll just try this one here just to get all of the games. It does support JSON and XML. I'm just going to be using JSON for this demo. So I've switched the media type to JSON. I'll hit execute. Hit execute, and then we just get an array back with all of these different video games. Let's try out the post call as well. So the post call will just send this basic body of JSON here just to create a new game. So I just hit execute on that, execute again, then we get a response back just showing that the game was created. Now do note that this application does actually just run in read-only mode, so when you send a post call to create a new game isn't actually added to the database. You just get a response back from the API just to say that it has been. The reason that I run it in read-only mode is just so that everyone can use it. Otherwise, if everyone was creating a game, there'd be tons of games in the database.
Hey, there's too many of them.
The other calls are pretty simple as well. Put just updates the game, delete deletes the game as well. There's not too much more to say about this application. It's really simple, but yeah, it's just a useful API to play around with when you're learning tools like karate. But before we go on, do me a favor right now if this video is helping you out. Be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Okay, let's go on and get this template project cloned. So to help you get started with karate as quickly and as easily as possible, I've just created a really basic GitHub repository, and you can browse to that here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to clone this repo basically and just load it up into an IDE. So if you browse over to this address, I'm just going to click code over here. I'm going to copy this URL and then going to switch to my terminal window. I'm just going to clone that with git clone and then paste in that repo basically. I'm then going to cd into that repo that we just downloaded, and then I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. To do that, I just type in code dot. So once we do that, Visual Studio Code opens up. Let's just have a really quick look through this repository. So we've got the pom.xml. This just contains all of the dependencies that we need in order to run and install karate. We're using the Maven wrapper. We'll see that in a moment when we execute our tests. In the source examples, you can ignore the logback tests and the karate config. We're not really going to be using that. Then the examples, I've just got this examples test Java. This is the class that we're going to execute when we execute our tests. We don't need to worry about that. The only file that's probably really interesting here for karate is this HTTP bin feature file. And this is actually a real karate test. So the first thing that you might notice here, that this is all grayed out and it's quite difficult to read. So the first thing you probably want to do here is go ahead and install the karate plugin. So if I head over to extensions here, if I search for karate, and I actually already have this one installed, make sure that you do get the official one, the one from Karate Labs up here. So just click installed on that. I've already got it installed, I haven't enabled it. So I'm just going to enable the extension like so. And once I've done that, if I now go back over to my HTTP file again, now it's got all of the color coding, and now it looks, it's a lot easier to read. So this is just a really basic karate test that I've just included in here just to show the syntax coloring. We're actually going to write our own test here directly from scratch. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to delete this file altogether, just because I want to go completely from scratch and write our own one. So I'm deleting the HTTP bin file here. So let's go ahead now and write our tests. So just in this examples folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'll just call that, let's say, video game tests.feature. So all karate files, or their test files, need to be .feature files. So I'll just give it a name of video game database tests. Before I start writing my test scenario, I'm actually going to add a background keyword here, and I'm going to add just one single background variable. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the URL here in the background, just so that I don't need to keep specifying it each time in the different scenarios. So for that, I can do star URL. Then I'm just going to paste in the URL. So this is the URL of the API that we're using basically. Okay, so let's give our test scenario a name. So for the first test, we're just going to do this one as get all video games and then get first game by ID. Okay, so the way that we write karate tests is basically just using given, when, then. So we do the given block first to set up the test. So I'm going to say given a path of video game. So if I just jump back over to Swagger, if I look at, this is the call that we want to make in our test, this one to list all video games. So if I just execute this quickly, we can see here, if we look at the request URL, this is the URL that we just specified before, and then we're just using this path here, i.e. the video game path. So again, we've got the URL here, and then we're just appending video game to the end of that. Okay, so this is going to be a get call. So next we do our when block, that's the second block. We'll say when method is get. So again, this could be get, post, put, delete, any of the different API verbs or HTTP verbs you can use here. So this one's just a get call, and then we want to check something. So in this case, I'm just going to check that the status that we get back is a 200, i.e. just that the response worked successfully. Okay, so that's our first API call. So this code here, that's going to just make that call to the video game endpoints, the one that gets all of the games, and it's just going to check that the response we get back is a 200. So what we're going to want to do when we get that response back is we're actually just going to want to grab the data for one of these games. So let's say we just want to grab the data for the first game, and then we'll use that in a second call. So if we look here at the API, we're calling this one here to list all the games. This call allows us to just specify a single game ID. So if we chose this one, I'll just change this over to application JSON. So again, if we made this call with ID 1, we just get back an ID just for a single game. So that's what we're going to want to do in our second call in our script. So let's see how we can do that. In Karate, I can do *def to define a new variable. I'll just call this variable the first game. And then to populate that, we just take the response. That's taking the whole JSON response. We just want to get the one at position 0, i.e. the first element that comes back. So that's going to give us this JSON here, basically, which is going to have all of the details of this first game. So now I want to make a second API call. So I'm going to do another given. So I'll say given path. The path's going to be the same video game path, but we're also going to supply the ID as well. So we're not just calling video game, we're going to call video game / and then the game ID, i.e. the game ID that we got from the first game. To pass in that game ID, I can literally type first game and then .id. I could use any of the keys that I've got here. I could use the ID, the name, the release date, etc. I'm just using the ID here because I want game 1. Okay, so we've got our path, and again, this is going to be another get call. So we'll say when method get. And again, we'll check that the status is at 200. Okay, before we execute this, let's add in a second scenario. And this one, we're just going to actually create a new game. So we'll jump over to the API again. This time I want to make this post call here to create the game. So I'm just going to grab this example JSON because this is the payload that we need to send. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that payload into a variable just within Karate. So let's just do another *def to create another variable. We'll call this one just video game. And I'm going to add triple quotes just so that I can do a string on multiple lines. And then I'll just paste in my blob of JSON here like so. Okay, now let's write out our test. So again, we do another given path. The path is the same, it's still the video game path. And we need to provide a request body, so we'd say and request. We're using that video game that we just defined above. This time we're doing a post, so we'll say when method post. And again, we'll just check simply here that the status is a 200. Okay, I'm going to save this file. And now I want to execute these tests. So I could execute them in the IDE here, but this does require that you have the Karate plugin installed and in subscription to Karate as well. If you don't have that, you can just execute through Maven using the Maven wrapper. So you don't even have to have Maven installed. Let me show you how to do that. So because we have this example test here as well, basically when we run the Maven test command, it's just going to run all of the tests within the project, which includes this test runner here. And this test runner will basically run our Karate tests for us. So we don't need to do anything with this examples test. We just need to know that we have it here. Okay, so I've opened up a terminal. And so to run this with the Maven wrapper, I can do /mvnw, and I'll just do clean and test. So again, because we're using the Maven wrapper, you don't even have to have Maven installed, which is really handy. Then we get a message at the bottom that the test completed, and we get a bit of a test result report here, shows us that a couple of scenarios were run. So once the test gets run, Karate generates a test result report for us. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to copy this line here, paste that into my browser, and then we get to access the Karate test results report. So this is the report that gets generated after every Karate test. We can see we've got our 2 scenarios passed. We click into here, we get some more details of the call that was made. So this first one here that made the call to get all the video games, when it did a get, we can see all of the logs here. We can see all of the games that have come back in our JSON. We can see that our status was 200. And we can see we made this call here where we got a single game. And we can see as well that we just got this JSON blob back here for a single game. And in our second scenario where we actually created a game, we made this post call. We can see what data we sent. And then that we got a response back indicating that a new game was created. So this has been a quick overview of Karate and a really basic example of how to write an API test. Obviously, we're only scratching the surface here. So if you want to learn more about the tool, I'd highly recommend checking out their comprehensive documentation, and they have a bunch of useful getting started videos on here as well. But what about you? Are you using Karate in your test automation project? How are you getting on with it? We've seen that Karate has a ton of features. Is there anything you would like me to cover? Do let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. But I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you in the next one.